All right, hello and welcome to, it's Work, Wisdom, and Wonder on YouTube, and here I've decided to be the intellectual idiot. And actually, it's because of what I'm talking about today. So, by way of introduction, I'm David. I used to teach at the U.S. Air Force Academy. I was a literature instructor, as well as rhetoric and composition. And without any ado whatsoever, today we're talking about Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot. And oh my gosh, this book was recommended to me by a gal that I met when I was at Oxford. And she just asked a series of difficult questions, and I've actually posted in response to her before. But this is the book where Dostoevsky says that beauty will save the world. And I mean, this question that my friend asked me, she was like, why this book? Why this book for Beauty Will Save the World? And if you haven't read The Idiot, spoiler alert, but it's been out for more than 100 years. I haven't actually calculated, but it's been out for a very long time. So if you haven't read it yet, and if you want to read it before you listen to potential spoilers, then do that. Otherwise, you can listen here, and I am going to talk about the book all the way through. So I've been obsessed with beauty for a long time, and I've spent a lot of time reading and a lot of time thinking about and considering rhetoric and now beauty. And I'm getting ready to, I've just applied to Cambridge for my PhD in theology and a theology of beauty and storytelling. And I think Fyodor Dostoevsky and the novel as a form is one of these excellent places to think about beauty. And I was actually talking with some other friends yesterday, and I think artists are so important to us considering things like beauty and just the things of the world. Because if we think about the way that history has kind of unfolded, I would contend that artists are explorers of the human experience. And then the scientists and, your very technical minded folks come in afterwards as the cartographers. And they explain and they map what the explorers have already gone through. That's kind of the way that I think about this. So Dostoevsky, I think, is exploring things about beauty in his work, The Idiot, and in many of his works that we're still wrestling with and trying to map. And part of that is because beauty is such a ineffable, kind of strange, mysterious, almost mystical thing. And for that reason, a lot of us have subjectivized beauty, I think, because it's so difficult to try to really approach it as it is, that we just say, oh no, it's just a matter of taste, so I don't really have to worry about it, I don't really have to talk about it. I think part of that is it's not because people are lazy, it's actually because they're a little bit overwhelmed by beauty, because that's what beauty does, is it overwhelms us. It's one of the things that it does. And this is where you get outflows like Edmund Burke's The Sublime. But if we bring it back to the idiot in Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot is Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin. And Lev Nikolaevich, the Prince Mishkin, is of good breeding, right? He's from a princely family in old Russia, but he's an idiot. And in the context of this book, he's basically, he has a series of fits, is what they're called, when he is younger and really can't think well, can't hardly speak, is in a very bad place. And perhaps this is what we would understand today closer to like a really bad case of epilepsy. Any number of ways that we could think about it from a medical side, but I'm less interested in the medical aspect than I am in this concept of a kind of a medical issue that affects one's mind, ability to speak, ability to engage with the world, that goes into significant suppression during the course of the book, that allows Prince Mishkin to actually engage in the adventures, is a strange way to say it, because it's really, it's all like just familial stuff, right? It's not like an adventure novel. But it starts on a train where Lev Nikolaevich is coming from Switzerland and in the wrong clothes to be coming to Russia. He's very underdressed and meets Rogozhin, right? This is going to be the foil for Mishkin over the course of the entire book. And Rogozhin is about to inherit like an immense wealth. And actually, Prince Mishkin is also about to inherit wealth. And we get that kind of in the early parts of this. But those are the two, like Rogozhin and Mishkin are the foils, the male foils of this story. But then you have the female foils of the story. And the female foils are Nastasia Filipovna, on the one hand, whose beauty is almost a terror through the course of the book. And then you have Aglaya Ivanovna, who is the youngest of the Yapanchin family. Her father is a general, and she's been basically groomed by her family. She's been spoiled in a sense by her family because she's the most beautiful of the daughters, and there are 3 daughters in the family, and Aglaya is the youngest, and Dostoevsky establishes that Aglaya has been kind of groomed by the family to be the hope of the family for the best possible marriage, the best possible chance at this perfect kind of love, and these high expectations. On the opposite side, you have Nastasia Filipovna, who was raised kind of in a strange situation. She's raised by a much older man, and there's a lot of different there's a lot of things happening with Nastasia Filipovna, and I can't even really remember all of them. But what ends up happening with her is, again, I said there would be spoilers. Ultimately, she ends in tragedy. We'll put it that way. And I really, as I'm speaking about this, I don't really even know what I think about beauty in the context of this book. I don't know what I think about many of the characters because there's so much depth to all of them. And there's so much humanness. I think more than any other author that I have read, Fyodor Dostoevsky is such a learned describer of human interaction and action and choice and personality that he creates very deep and intricate and real characters. There is no real typology in his work. Anyone who says that Jung's archetypes are like universal, I don't think they work for Dostoevsky because his characters are too deep for an archetype. They are too singular in many ways, but at the same time can like reflect archetypal aspects. Dostoevsky does such a good job of building deep characters that it's hard to archetype them, and I think that's important. But one of the things that I do think is kind of happening is that there is synecdoche happening. And for people out there who aren't literature nerds, synecdoche is essentially when one thing or one part of a thing accounts for or represents the whole thing. And in this case, I think one personality is, in the case of Nastasia Filipovna, meant to reflect a kind of personality of the church. And this isn't direct allegory. So I want to be careful with this because Dostoevsky, I don't think, is intending direct allegory. And as much as people try to say that authorial intention doesn't matter, I think that's ridiculous when we're talking about a novel. Like, we should try to consider what the author actually intended by anything they were doing, even if we can't know for sure. We should at least try to consider it. But I don't think there's an allegory intended necessarily, but I think there is an aspect of allegory here, in that Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin, Prince Mishkin, is like an almost too good character that would represent a kind of almost a Christian ideal. He's actually quite firm, he's very gracious, but he has a strength to him, even though he's an idiot, right? And people call him an idiot. He just like doesn't fit in the society. He doesn't fit in the culture. He is an honest man, almost to a fault, as far as the people around him say. Like, he says what he thinks, he's passionate, but also like in many ways soft-spoken, and kind of, he holds a kind of gentle calmness. He's a very interesting figure. And if Nastasia Philippovna were to love him, really truly love him, then there is the potential for real happiness for her, as well as for Mishkin. And this is early in the book when this becomes an option. But Rogozhin, right? Parfyun Semyonovich Rogozhin, who is the foil for Mishkin, even though they end up being friends and rivals, Rogozhin is the dark, evil. Evil's maybe too strong a word, because we can't just depict him as like this raw evil character. Again, I think Dostoevsky's characters resist archetypes. But Rogozhin, in the context of this analogy, might reflect a kind of turning to the world, of turning to really any kind of worship that is other than the worship of God, turning away from Christ. And if Nastasia Philippovna represents a kind of hard, beautiful woman who is running from Christ, in that sense running from the church, or the church running from Christ, I think there's something to that. I think there's a kind of beauty reflecting in this idea of Christ and his bride. It is not a perfect allegory, though, and it's not a perfect analogy. There's too much that is up in the air to really say that strongly. So then why is this a book that says that beauty will save the world? And in what way could beauty save the world? When the beauty of Nastasia Philippovna ultimately results in her death. She's getting ready to marry Mishkin towards the end of the book. They're about to marry. She's all dolled up. She's ready to go. She's in her white dress. She looks stunning, like overwhelming. And she runs down the stairs into the crowd to Rogozhin and basically begs him to take her away. She flees from her own wedding. And again, this spoilers, this is the end of the book. And Rogozhin takes her into his house, sneaks her into his house, tries to cover his tracks as best he can, and then murders her. Rogozhin wants to own her beauty. He wants to own it, and he can't control her, so he has to kill her. This is the only way to control her. If he can't have her, no one can. This is Parfyun Semyonovich Rogozhin. And the end of this book is just so haunting, because Mishkin goes looking for his runaway bride and goes to Rogozhin's home and ends up finally meeting Rogozhin, who, by the way, earlier in the book tried to kill Mishkin, and Mishkin is only saved by an epileptic seizure that keeps him from being attacked, because Rogozhin essentially gets surprised and instead, gets him the help he needs and moves on. But now Mishkin goes to Rogozhin's home at the end and is invited by Rogozhin to basically spend the night in the room where he murdered Nastasia Philippovna. And Rogozhin's completely loses his mind over the course of that night and is just ranting and rambling. And the other person who loses his mind is Mishkin. Mishkin returns to being an idiot. He doesn't recover. The book ends with him going off and he returns to care outside of Russia under the care of a doctor and is unable to speak and basically returns to being completely disconnected from the world. And it's really quite sad. The ending of this story, there's almost no positives. It's really a tragedy. And yet this tragedy is where Dostoevsky says that beauty will save the world. And that line is put into the mouth of Mishkin. And then it's put into the mouth of this consumptive young man named Hippolyte, who is going to be presumably dying soon, but rambles and rants and really is kind of just a wicked figure. So why is beauty such a thing in this book? And what's going on with Mishkin? So if we take this kind of idea, and this is something that I would love to talk with somebody about, because I think that would actually help a lot, actually have the conversation, because it's so hard to think about it myself. It's just such a hard book. But the other quote that Mishkin says very early upon his first meeting with Aglaya Ivanovna, So the first meeting between Mishkin and the Yupanchin family, he meets with Lizaveta Prokofyevna, who is the matron of the family, as well as Alexandra, Adelaida, and Aglaya, and he meets all of them at the same time. And they end up sitting around the table, and they essentially ask him to describe them. And he does an excellent job of describing their personalities merely by looking at them. Mishkin is a very perceptive person. But when he arrives at Aglaya, he lingers for a moment, and they kind of prod him. They're like, well, what of Aglaya? What do you have to say of Aglaya? Isn't she beautiful? And what would you say? And he says, I don't know yet. And further, he says, beauty is a riddle. And this idea that beauty is a riddle, I think, might actually provide a little bit of an understanding to what's going on in this story. Because I agree with him, beauty is a riddle. And I think this is actually more important than the statement that beauty will save the world. Because beauty is a riddle, or beauty as a riddle, is something that raises a couple of questions, right? What kind of riddle? And is it a riddle we actually want the answer to? Is it a problem? And I think this distinction between a riddle and a problem could be helpful in thinking about the difference between Rogozhin and Mishkin in terms of how they perceive and interact with beauty. Because at a certain point, Mishkin says he's in love with Aglaya and makes an offer of marriage to Aglaya. But there is this tension because Aglaya and Nastasia Filipovna are also rivals, and there's this whole engagement that I can't even go through and explain right now. But there is this slightest hesitation in Mishkin. But it's not because he doesn't love Aglaya and because he loves Nastasia Filipovna more. It's actually, for Mishkin, I would say, because Mishkin has an intellectual approach to the issue of beauty, and therefore apprehends and loves all that is beautiful, including Aglaya and Nastasia Filipovna, but in a kind of distant, intellectual way. He feels strongly, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't really understand the emotive aspect of this. He is intellectually engaged and loves the riddle. He loves the process of riddling. He loves trying to understand. And in the case of Nastasia Filipovna, he sees a beautiful young woman who has been through much and has been driven essentially mad by it. And he wants to understand her, and he also, in a sense, wants to save her. This is kind of the inverse of the typical Harlequin romance, where like you get a kind of virginal woman who tries to save the monstrous man. The inverse of this is Mishkin, who is this kind of virginal, almost perfect, like Christian type man, trying to save the very non-virginal, like potentially very problematic Nastasia Filipovna. But Mishkin sees beauty and relationships and these things as riddles, but not riddles to be solved, riddles to be played with. But when he gets to the point of being forced to solve, to ultimately come to a resolution, to make a choice of one beauty over another, he can't really do it. And he is then at the mercy of the will of others and kind of the will of the broader story of what happens. So when Aglaya and Nastasia Filipovna are there in person with Mishkin and Rogozhin, and Nastasia Filipovna basically mocks Aglaya and says, hey, you know, I want Mishkin to come to me and I'll send Rogozhin away and Mishkin's going to be mine forever. And Aglaya asks a question and looks at Mishkin, and there is a tiny hesitation in Mishkin, and then Aglaya runs. And Mishkin tries to run after her, but then Nastasia Filipovna grabs him and then faints. And because she faints, he stays to care for her, because this is his natural nature. He cares for that which is beautiful and nearest to him. Because for him, there is a kind of intellectualism here, but there is not a steady and overarching emotive or affectional concern. He loves the riddle, but he doesn't want to be forced to solve the riddle or to resolve it. And this is his problem. The other side, another way to deal with beauty, is this beauty not as a riddle, but beauty as a problem, right? Because people can think of riddles in terms of play, which I think is what Mishkin is more doing, that it's fun to play with the riddle. I don't need to necessarily come to an answer. An answer would be good and would be interesting, but I don't have to come to an answer in order to still enjoy and to play. Just the process of figuring it out is fun. But Rogozhin sees beauty as a problem. It's a problem to be solved. And the only way to solve the problem of beauty, which is largely a problem of desire for Rogozhin, as well as for Mishkin, though Mishkin's desire is a little bit less strong because he is so intellectually inclined, which is funny since he's called the idiot. Rogozhin sees it as a problem to be solved and says to himself in various ways that the problem can be solved by my ownership and control of beauty. Or if that beauty is too willful, the problem of beauty can be ultimately solved by destroying that beauty. If I can't own it, if I can't solve it, no one can. And I think we live in a society that is very much on one of these two extremes. Beauty as a problem needing a solution, and beauty as a kind of intellectual riddle that's just kind of frivolous and fun, but with no real affection behind it. And I think we see this in very sharp artistic critics are on the Rogozhin side. They want to own it. They want to say exactly what art is and isn't. They want strict rules. And on the other side, you have a bunch of people who just want to be entirely frivolous, which actually I think is further away from Mishkin, but entirely frivolous. They want to say, well, everything is beautiful and I'll accept everything. And I won't call anything not beautiful. And I'll be eminently careful and caring for everything and everyone. But it actually distances them from people. I think in Mishkin and Rogozhin, we see two extremes of how not to deal with beauty, especially the beauty found in a person. Now, beyond this, that raises the question of if Mishkin and Rogozhin show extremes of how not to deal with beauty, right? Frivolity on the one side and over-seriousness perhaps on the other. What is the right way? What is the middle road? What is the path of beauty? What is the right way to think about beauty? And this is why I think Fyodor Dostoevsky is such an amazing author, because he doesn't give us answers. He raises excellent questions that allow us to continue in conversation with his works and with each other. And I think this is what great literature does in general. It doesn't answer questions. It raises questions. And this is, I think, what we have lost in the process of beauty. Beauty is a riddle. It is absolutely a riddle. But the middle road seems to be a tension that allows us to say at the same time that beauty is a riddle to be played with and enjoyed and kind of messed with a little bit, right? To create and to play like Mishkin. And it is a problem, but not fully to be solved. The middle way to me is, and any literary scholar is going to potentially laugh me out of the room because they're going to say, oh, of course, you would come back to Keats. Keats's negative capability, the idea of holding two things to be true that seem contradictory and holding them in one's mind without grasping after one or the other is central to understanding, not even understanding, to apprehending and enjoying beauty. Because if I erase the mystery of beauty by trying to own it or kill it, like Rogozhin does, then I kill it. And on the other side, if I merely play in the mystery, then I learn nothing from beauty. I don't grow. And that is Mishkin. Mishkin is the idiot who recognizes the vast importance of beauty, but cannot bring himself to actually learn anything from it. While Rogozhin also recognizes the importance of beauty, but in his personal pride and greed, wants to own it, control it, or kill it. That is most devastating when the beauty that we are talking about is a person. Now, to bring this back to a Christian notion, this is exactly what happens with Christ. He is the most beautiful, the beautiful one. And I'm not just talking about visible beauty. I mean, the scripture says that there was nothing that would draw him or draw us to him. It's likely that he was homely in that sense, or kind of plain looking. Yet he is the most beautiful. He is the source of all beauty. And what did we do? We killed him. We destroyed him because we could not live with such beauty. Now, what does this mean for us today in church? What might we learn from Mishkin and Rogozhin, from Nastasia Filipovna and Aglaya Ivanovna? There are things that we could learn from every single character in this story, certainly. But for the concept of beauty, I think what we learn, at least what I've learned, I can't say what everyone else learns. What I have learned is, one, to think of beauty in a more complex and dynamic way. And I've talked about this before, and I'll continue talking about it. Beauty is not static. Beauty is living. Beauty is life. And so much of our art today, and I put that in quotes, art is just ugliness. And I think it's easier to throw up ugliness and call it art because it doesn't challenge us, because it doesn't make us strive for anything more, because it doesn't ask anything of us. But beauty asks something of us. Beauty requires a response. And if we're lazy, or we're slothful, or we're angry, or we're prideful, beauty's call, beauty's demand to love, to care for it, to give it life and growth and everything that it needs, especially when we're talking about in the life of a person. The demands of beauty are something we resist all the time. So we would rather ignore it. We forget the beauty of Christ because if we don't see his beauty, then we don't feel compelled to obey him. Or alternatively, we do see the beauty of Christ. We see our failings. We see the gap between us and that beauty. And we, like Rogozhin, are offended. And then we see the gap between us and Christ and the one who could love her better, who loves beauty better. And all we can think is we have to destroy that thing because it reminds us of our own inadequacies. Beauty makes demands that cowards either try to kill or avoid. And this is why I think beauty has been relegated to a portion of our society and of our culture that is so far from central. But we need a restoration because beauty makes demands and beauty provides motivation in ways that nothing else does. And as believers, when we really recognize the beauty of Christ, it makes demands, but they are so delightful to attempt to fulfill because he is so worth it. And when we come to awe and wonder and majesty, we are compelled to worship the Lord of glory, the Lord of beauty, who is the source of all delight in the universe. So I'm thankful for artists like Dostoevsky who write these excellent books that give us the opportunity not to answer questions, but to really wrestle with them so that we can come to higher and higher forms, higher and higher understandings, and higher apprehensions of those things, those beautiful things, those good things, those true things that move us to love those around us and to love the God we serve. That's all I have for today. Go away.